Welcome everyone to this wonderful event. Hello everyone. So this wonderful event put on by the WWIN group, it is the day to celebrate us women in math. Round of applause for that. So quick quiz to get us going. What does WWIN stand for?
Waterloo Women's Impact Network.
There we go, Waterloo Women's Impact Network. It's also not a difficult quiz because it's right there on the screen. So it's Waterloo Women's Impact Network, and today is, May 12th, is the International Day of Women in Mathematics. And I'm really happy to be surrounded by all you mathies today. Round of applause for that. So I'm Kim Jack. I have the honor of being your hostess for today, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I was a University of Waterloo mathie, graduated in '98 with math and teaching option. I was a high school teacher, math and computer science, for 5 years, teaching in Ontario. Yes, teachers? Yeah. I'm going to be doing a lot of cheers for applause. It's going to get really old really soon. I taught in Ontario, I taught in Europe and South America, and then I did a career change into IT, where I was a corporate trainer, project manager, eventually moved into an executive role at Canadian Tire, doing some really great projects like launching the e-commerce platform for Canadian Tire. And currently I'm Vice President of IT for Bunzl Canada. Bunzl is the biggest company you've never heard of. We are an international distributor, so for example, in the kitchens here, the napkins that they would use, or those big machines around campus to clean the floors, those might have been supplied by us. And I am a proud member of the WWIN group. So what is WWIN? Women's Impact Network, Waterloo Women's Impact Network. We aim to make Waterloo the best place in the world for women and underrepresented genders to study math and computers. And we aim for help alumni out there in working in math and technology industries, and we want to spark the excitement for math and computer science in all youth, not just young men, of course. Well, how do we do it? We work with our on-campus partners, such as the Center for Education in Math and Computers Science, the Women in Computer Science group, and the Women in Math group. And we fund different initiatives to support innovative ideas, early outreach, and student support. And I joined WWIN. Well, why did I join WWIN? It's something I believe in strongly to support women and underrepresented genders in math and computers, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. That's why we're here today. We're trying to make it easier for the generation after us to work in these industries and to study math and computers. We have to tap into the collective brain power of everyone to be advanced as a society, not just the typical people that we see studying math and computers. We need all genders, all underrepresented groups to study here. And we're not going to advance as a society the way we want to. We're not going to be as innovative as we want to be. We need to be diverse and get the representation of different diverse thoughts in math and computer science so that we can advance as a society the way that we want it to be. Christian Lemieux is going to come up and give us some opening remarks.
Thank you, Kim. I'm honored to be here today for this important event. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that much of our work takes place on the territory of the Neutral, the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Alderman Tract, which is the land granted to the Six Nations and includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, teaching, learning, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. The International Women in Mathematics Day was created in 2019 in honor of Iranian-American mathematician Maryam Mirzakhani, who was born on May 12, 1977. Mirzakhani was the first Iranian and the first woman to win the Fields Medal, which is the most prestigious award in mathematics. Tragically, she passed away from cancer in 2017. So this special day is an opportunity for us to recognize the women who came before us and had to overcome a lot of obstacles to be recognized for their success in mathematics. And while we celebrate these achievements, we should also think about those who were not able to pursue mathematics because of discrimination, whether overt or systemic. And while there's plenty to celebrate, we should also be clear-sighted about the work that needs to be done to make sure that we can create a truly welcoming and supportive culture within the field of mathematics. And as we undertake this critical work, we should be inspired by the wise words of Miriam Mirzakhani, who said in an interview that discussing mathematics with colleagues of different backgrounds was one of the most productive ways to make progress. Throughout 2022, the University of Waterloo set out to answer the following question: what do we aspire to be known for by our 100th anniversary in 2057? And the result was the discussion paper, Waterloo at 100, which has now been adopted as our institution's vision. And during the consultation process, diversity emerged time and time again as a key priority for our community. And as a result, one of our vision's major objectives is to create an equitable and inclusive culture at the university. The vision also states that post-secondary education has a responsibility to reckon with our country's colonial past and ongoing harms, and recognize that our students, faculty, and staff are shaped by different lived experience and backgrounds. Organizations like WWIN, CMC, WIX, and WIM are essential to achieving the university's diversity goals. They're leading the charge by creating a network of support, innovative programming, and empowering opportunities for women and other underrepresented genders in mathematics and computer science. So we should keep this in mind as we participate in today's session. Our work is critical, and it's helping shape the future of this institution and of society more generally.
Hello again, everyone. While you're finishing up that lovely lunch, I'd like to introduce Dr. Hilary Bergsieker. She's an associate professor of psychology at the University of Waterloo, where she leads the Diversity and Intergroup Relations Lab and serves as her department's program area lead for equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. Her training in experimental social psychology and social policy was completed at Stanford University and Princeton University. She has expertise in trust formation and maintenance in diverse groups, social network analysis, and bias reduction. She was named a Rising Star by the Association for Psychological Science and won the Rogers Woman of the Year Award for Excellence in STEM. As a member of the Engendering Success in STEM Research Consortium, she collaborates with industry partners to use evidence-based interventions to advance the inclusion and success of women and other underrepresented groups in science, technology, engineering, and math. Please join me for our keynote speaker, Dr. Hilary Bergsieker.
Well, thank you, Kim, for that warm introduction, and thank you for the honor and privilege of speaking with you today about some of the research that my team has been conducting. So I will just jump right in to say this work is all made possible by a SHIRK grant to our team to work for 7 years on promoting a culture of gender inclusion, promoting women's participation and success in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. But this work could not have happened without the active support and partnership of a number of organizations. So, huge thanks to these forward-looking institutions for partnering with us in this research. And what I'll be doing today is sharing 2 lines of work that we've done that are really about intervening for change. So thinking about what can we actually do to try to improve some of these challenges that women and other gender minorities face, as well as other underrepresented groups in STEM. All right. The scope of this project is really kind of envisioned as almost like a cradle to coffin series of research projects, really tracking across the life course the different phases at which inclusion or exclusion can happen. I'll be focusing on the two parts of the project that I help co-direct. So the part focusing on adolescents, and as well the part looking at industry, workplace professionals, and their experiences. So first, we're going to dive into the adolescents, but I do want to sort of situate this in terms of the theoretical background a little bit first. So in an award-winning paper by my colleague Tony Schmader at UBC, the sort of theoretical context here that she's developed is that feelings of authenticity and fit are really critical in any setting. For us to be able to feel like we are succeeding, that we're doing what we want to do, feeling like we fit in is incredibly important. And what's novel here isn't that insight, but it's about understanding how fit works and what fit is that I think really led to this paper being so recognized and being so generative in terms of the research that we've done. So Tony and her colleagues break fit down into three different components. First, looking at the idea of goal or value fit. So this is an alignment between the things you think matter, why you do your work, and the work that you're doing. So finding real meaning and impact, significance in the work that you do is one dimension of experiencing fit. Another one has to do with your self-concept, how you see yourself, whether the kinds of abilities that you have, if you see yourself as an analytic person or as highly organized or whatever your traits might be, if you feel like there's a good alignment between the traits that are valued and in demand in the setting that you're working in and the traits that you carry, and similarly your interests, that's self-concept fit. And then the third kind of fit is social fit. So this is about feeling respected, socially valued and included by the people around you in that setting. And it can even include the people outside of that setting. So one dimension of fit can even be if I'm in this particular context, how will people outside of this context see me? Will I become a social outcast, or will I still be respected and included? All right, so these are the sort of three dimensions of fit that we're thinking about theoretically, and our interventions were designed to sort of target and help increase girls and women's feelings of fit in STEM contexts, and also find ways to change those contexts to be more supportive of women and girls' fit. So the first project that I'll talk about is focusing in on adolescence. This was done in partnership with Engineering Science Quest and Engineering Outreach Office here at Waterloo. But there are some really good reasons to think that adolescence is a great time to intervene. So we know just at a logistical level that, I should say at a data level, that there aren't big differences in math performance or ability among middle schoolers. If anything, some data suggests girls are even tending to do better. Certainly when you look at international data like the PISA and other kind of global tests of mathematical ability, there really aren't differences in performance in these sort of early adolescent sort of ages. Where differences start to emerge in terms of STEM participation, though, is as soon as high school, that even in high school, and even today, I've seen some of the latest data for all of Canada on enrollment in STEM courses, and there continues to be a discrepancy between the extent to which boys and girls in high school are taking STEM courses. And this is important because if you don't choose in your early part of high school to take grade 11 STEM classes like calculus or get to start taking physics, it then limits which university programs you're even eligible for and your options. So when you want to then maybe say, oh, I want to try out a career in STEM, or a major in STEM, if you haven't already laid the groundwork of taking the right electives, you may not have the option to do so, let alone coming to actually choose that STEM major or ultimately pursue a STEM career. So our idea here was that there's sort of a critical window for intervening, that if we can get to intervene with adolescents before they make these choices, that could have some pretty powerful downstream ripple effects in terms of opening doors for them later. All right, so the team of people, this is just alphabetical order. I love alphabetical order. And it's actually a subset of our team, but that designed and implemented these interventions, which were conducted not only in Ontario, but also in British Columbia at a couple different sites. We decided to target sort of two different kind of lines of intervention that were tailored to different aspects of the kind of barriers that might limit girls and women's participation in STEM. Oops, sorry, I just hit blank instead of next. There we go. So there's some data both external to our team and our own data that speaks to the fact that even at these ages, so at early adolescence, boys and girls tend to think that the boys are a little bit better at STEM topics, despite the fact that there isn't objective data for that age group to actually support those beliefs, and that girls are anticipating lack of fit in STEM as they look sort of down the road to what they might want to do next. So we thought, let's try to do a sort of a twofold or two-prong intervention. For boys, let's try to intervene to see if we can get them to do less of this gender stereotyping, to have more appreciation for girls' STEM abilities. And then for girls, can we actually help model, help them see themselves in STEM by connecting STEM to their values and by helping them, again, see the sort of positive exemplars of other people succeeding, people like them in these contexts. All right, so I'm going to describe these two aims, sorry, wrong button again, there we go, of trying to first reduce boys' stereotyping of girls' STEM abilities, and then secondly, trying to increase girls' STEM identity, fit, and interest. And we conducted this research in STEM-focused camps, so these were summer camps where boys and girls with parental permission were invited to participate in a research project. I'll be discussing the data from all of the boys across all three waves, but then for the girls, I'm going to be focusing just on the final wave because it took some tweaking to get our intervention to actually be effective. I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A if anyone's interested. About 45% of the eligible campers chose to participate. And again, everyone was in the sort of, the intervention that was delivered by camp counselors. Some of my slides call them interventionists. That's just fancy talk for camp counselors, who were mostly STEM major undergraduates, for working within these camps. So we partnered with them to be sort of well-qualified people to deliver these experts as sort of near peers to the students. So in terms of the design of the research, we had a control condition, both for boys and girls, that was structurally pretty simple and similar. And then we had customized boys and girls treatment conditions. And this was all just fully integrated within the camp, so kids had no idea which treatment anybody was getting or what have you. They'd just be pulled aside for a little one-on-one chat with a counselor, and that would either involve a treatment or not, and that was randomized, of course, per best practices in science. So the control condition, people just talked with any of the camp counselors. It could be a man or woman. They did some introductions, icebreakers. If you had a superpower, what would it be? That kind of thing, and just talked about how they like camp, and that was that. So pretty straightforward, just mild positive intervention, but nothing intended to change their beliefs about STEM. For boys in the treatment condition, however, in addition to that content, they had an opportunity to experience a value affirmation. That's when we talk about a value that is important to you personally, and that we know from psychological research that the experience of sort of reflecting on a value that matters to you could be your friends, your faith, your family, it could be the environment, music, whatever. Something that matters to you personally has an impact of sort of bolstering your self-concept, making you feel good about yourself, and also opening your mind a little bit more to potentially threatening or new information. So we started with that to lay the groundwork of then delivering a message that I'll detail in a moment about trying to change boys' minds about girls' STEM ability, and then followed that up with a reinforcing personal anecdote and authentic experience from the counselor. For girls, again, similar structure, but a slightly different content. So here we were really emphasizing the STEM value affordances, meaning how affordances is just, again, fancy talk for what things are possible in an area. So saying, okay, if you care a lot about, family, maybe being a bioengineer will help cure cancer, or helping people connect in more concrete ways than that sort of hypothetical I just gave, values that people care about to why STEM work can make a difference and matter and improve people's lives. They also got to hear a message about sort of fit in STEM from a peer role model, which again I'll detail in a moment, and then the camper wrapped things up with a message meant to convey a concept of double inclusion, which again I'll talk about in a second. But critically, there were surveys before and after all of this happened so that we could scientifically and rigorously compare the actual impact of these interventions. In the final year, we even had a sort of a midweek survey that right after the intervention captured a little bit of on the fly, what were folks thinking? All right. So what did this message, the core content, look like? Well, starting in the second year, the second wave of the research, we delivered that message via video, partly to help standardize it and also thinking a bit towards scalability. So the video is basically one in which faculty on our research team talks about some really neat research he has about how we tend to underestimate the abilities of people who are constrained in any way, for example, by stereotypes. So using the analogy of somebody running a race wearing ankle weights and running, say, a 10-second time, and then imagining how fast they would run if they took the weights off, we try to get boys thinking about the idea that, what we see of other folks' apparent abilities may only be sort of a dim reflection of what folks are actually capable of, and thinking about concretely a personal anecdote that the camp counselor themselves would share about their own appreciation for girls or women's abilities in STEM, like a time that they recognized that a woman had just really done something extraordinarily helpful or insightful in the STEM domain. So this was meant to kind of help build up boys' appreciation for girls' ability and their recognition that there may also be some hidden ability there that stereotypes are concealing. For girls, the message was much more about values and fit. So here the idea was to really help girls see through descriptions from near peers. These are admittedly undergraduates, not adolescents themselves, but pretty darn close, delivering a message talking about why they personally were inspired to go into STEM and connecting it back to their values, to what really matters to them. And in this context, we had that message then be reinforced by a female camp counselor talking about how her own experience of being in STEM had been one that positively socially connected her to other people within STEM, and that did not alienate her with outside of STEM. It wasn't like she suddenly became that math nerd that nobody wants to hang out with or something, but no, she continues to have friends in both domains, because there is research suggesting that both of those challenges, exclusion inside and outside, can be concerns for women in STEM. So what did we find? Well, for boys, we asked them, and these are hopefully quite simple, face-valid measures of stereotyping, basically asking them their beliefs about the extent to which girls their age or boys their age are good at math or good at science, good at computers. We combined these. I'm going to show you on the next slide here what the control group, so this is just looking at the boys in the control condition, just to show there are differences. Stereotyping is real, even in this age group, even in this day and age. We see that the perceived ability of boys is significantly higher than the perceived ability of girls among these, again, sort of 9 to 11-year-old boys in our sample. Now again, this is just all the boys in the control group who did not receive the treatment condition. What I'm going to show you, and I'm missing a label here, but this is the wave 1 is the farthest from me, so sort of over on your left. The wave 2 is the middle, and then the rest of that is all wave 3. So again, apologies for that one little oversight, but what you're going to see here is at least some indications early on that become significant when we analyze this data all together, that boys in the treatment condition have a higher estimation of girls' STEM ability. So the y-axis here is how highly boys rate girls' ability to do math, science, and work with computers in treatment versus control. And we're seeing, again, especially mega analytically, when we look at this data all together, that the boys have a higher appreciation for girls' STEM ability after receiving that treatment. That was exciting, and we were encouraged, and that work is just about out. It's accepted with minor revisions. The other side of it, though, of course, is what about the girls? So for the girls, we asked them about their interest in, their current feelings of fit. So right now, sort of in your STEM, your science and math classes, how much do you feel like you belong? But then we also asked them how much they think they would belong in an engineering major or in other undergraduate STEM majors. We asked them about their interest in taking advanced math or physics classes in high school, as well as their interest in ultimately pursuing several STEM careers compared to various other control careers like doctor, scientist, doctor or journalist, et cetera. All right, and then for girls, what we see here is that right now, there isn't a problem. So this is comparing girls and boys to each other, just so we can kind of see, are there gender gaps at the starting point? So girls and boys are actually saying they feel like they belong equally in their math and science classes at the moment. So right now there isn't a fit gap. But the girls and boys are already differing in terms of what they think in high school or in undergrad, how much STEM fit or how much fit they're going to feel. So boys are thinking they're going to feel like they fit more if they're an engineering major than the girls are, again. And then similarly, we see the same kind of gender gap emerging for interest in taking advanced physics, advanced math in high school, and for pursuing STEM careers like being a chemist, mathematician, physicist, et cetera. So this is the landscape, again, the backdrop against which we're trying to intervene is the fact that it's when it comes to future fit and the future career and course interest that we're seeing gender gaps. And accordingly, when we look in our data at how the girls in treatment versus control express feelings of fit, we're seeing that their future fit did significantly improve in that immediate capture. So the survey that happened right after the intervention, we're seeing that girls who received that message about value fit and about being doubly included in STEM are expressing significantly higher anticipated fit if they were, say, an undergraduate engineering major. By the end of the week, there's still a hint of that pattern. It's a little less significant, but what we did still see by the end of the week is that interest in high school STEM courses had increased marginally, and interest in STEM careers had increased significantly for girls who saw that treatment video with the messaging around STEM and connecting to their values and social inclusion relative to the control condition. So in terms of some initial evidence that we can intervene to get boys to see girls' STEM abilities in a more positive light, to express more appreciation for them, and girls' motivation to go into these careers. It seems like both of these are modifiable things where well-informed science-based interventions can make a difference. I'm going to shift gears just because I only have 20 minutes to talk a little bit about our work in industry. So an industry setting with a somewhat different team of researchers. This is only a subset of the team again, but we've designed and implemented some randomized control trials of comparing two different kinds of training. So this is sort of gold standard research where there's both an active there's an inclusion training, which is about sort of inclusion, understanding bias, equipping people to be better allies, and we're contrasting that against an active training that tries to teach people useful leadership skills, which again is sometimes even offered as a pathway to advancement for women in a way to sort of counteract bias. So it's a very conservative control condition to say we're going to see if we can increase various outcomes with one type of workshop, the inclusion workshop, over the leadership workshop. These workshops were carefully crafted, again, based on the best science available, to get people to a place of open-mindedness and learning and being able to actually change their beliefs and behaviors. So we started with a design activity that reinforced some of the inclusion and leadership-related themes that we wanted people to pick up on. We had people do a values affirmation or have an opportunity to learn more about how values connected them to their field. There was a learning unit then that either focused on inclusion or leadership strategies. Learning about sort of bias and inclusion, I should say. There was an opportunity for dialogue to really apply and connect with your actual lived experience, this new information that everybody had received. And then finally, there was a chance to make a plan, an action plan. So if this happens, then I will do that, a real concrete plan to commit to doing something to change the environment. We followed people over almost 2 years, so we had a sample of roughly 300 participants, and we had almost perfect completion for the pre-survey, which is really important in terms of being able to assess change. And then by 2 years later, we were thankful to have a little bit over half our sample, all pretty gender balanced, as you can see here, that men and women were pretty evenly represented within the sample. And we then sort of looked at these different time points at what kinds of impacts the leadership and the inclusion workshop had. We saw in the short term that the inclusion workshop did significantly increase people's motivation to act as allies, as well as their self-efficacy. That's their feelings of knowing how to be an ally over and above the leadership workshop. We also saw a marginal difference in people's ability to recognize gender bias in test scenarios, and so accurately discerning when bias was likely or unlikely to be present, which is an important part of knowing when to act. So those are some short-term impacts. We also were concerned about backlash. There can be real resistance to diversity training or anything of that flavor. So we were, to look at this a little bit, we measured at baseline whether people thought that gender bias was a problem in their STEM field or not. And what I'll show you here is some nice evidence that it does not seem like we're getting backlash. On the contrary, it seemed like this intervention actually worked the best for people who were initially skeptical. So what I'm showing you here is going to be showing you across the different timeline of our study what people's later belief that gender bias was a problem were. And what we see is that specifically among people who started out skeptical, so low, thinking, yeah, gender bias isn't really a problem in my field. This was a continuous measure. I've just visually split it for graphical purposes. But among those people who were initially skeptical that bias was a problem, being in the inclusion workshop versus the leadership workshop led to a stable over time increase in their awareness that bias was a relevant challenge, right? Which we think is a big part of mobilizing change, is recognizing that a problem is present. Probably most of us can recall conversations with someone who was skeptical that bias was relevant in a setting, right? So this intervention seems to be working best among the people who are least convinced initially. What about people actually believing that allyship matters or taking action on their action plans? Well, we did see some evidence that the inclusion workshop specifically boosted people's perceptions that men acting as allies was really efficacious in terms of creating more inclusive environments for women in STEM. There wasn't a significant impact on perceptions of how valuable women's allyship was. Again, but people saw both as positive, right? These are well above 4. Like, no one's saying that women shouldn't be allies. There's just the sense that men have a special opportunity, right? Like, if we can partner with men to make change, that is really, likely to be the most effective strategy. In addition, we saw initially, and a little bit surprisingly to us, that women were much more likely to carry out their action plans. So men and women were telling us men's allyship is the most effective. But then the women were the ones that were actually getting up and doing their allyship plans. So that was a little discouraging at first. But then look at what happened over time. We saw a significant linear increase in men's allyship enactment over time. So the women are maintaining, they're staying stable, and the men were increasing. And that's the opposite of what you see with a lot of workshops or trainings where effects decay over time. So we were pretty excited about this, finding that it seems like even if it took a little while maybe for the men to find that opportunity, they do seem to be coming online, at least by the time we followed up with them almost 2 years later. Last finding about fit and engagement. Again, we started with fit. Let's close with fit. One of the more exciting findings for me that came out of this, and this is descriptively stronger among women, so it's not statistically significant difference between genders, but we see that the pattern is clearest for women. People who participated in the inclusion workshop felt greater fit at the final time point than people who did the leadership workshop. Now, those of you who are numbers oriented may be noticing that's because leadership went down, not because inclusion went up. I will point out there was a global pandemic during that period that put us all in a situation of remote work and intense disruption. So our theory is basically that the inclusion workshop helps sort of buffer or protect people's sense of engagement, because again, we're going to see the same pattern for engagement in that sort of difficult time. And again, that this is part of, and especially the fact that women were feeling extra engaged and extra sense of fit relative, if they'd done the inclusion training versus the leadership training 2 years later, is pretty exciting evidence of impact, we think. So anyway, happy to chat more. I know that was sort of the whirlwind tour, but this is sort of the 3 key successes. And I'll just close by saying, thank you again to the many organizations that partnered with us to make this work possible, for your attention today, and I really look forward to the Q&A. So thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, we're officially going to open the floor for Q&A. We do have, for our in-person audience, we'll have some mic runners, so we'll take your questions first. But then for our virtual audience joining us, please don't be afraid to write your questions in the Q&A box, and I will ask them shortly. So with that, would anyone like to start with a question? Yep, right over here.
I'll steal one off of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
slide, but I'm really curious about what happens to the girls.
Thanks for asking. So nothing is, the short answer is no effects. Like, we didn't see backfiring, but we didn't see significant differences. And we think that that happens because we were using a video of Mary Wells, the Dean of Engineering, who made the most compelling, wonderful video. I found it very moving as an adult, but she's not the same age group as the kids. Like, a number of them said, like, she reminded me of my mom, in their conversation with the counselor. And again, and Mary is a mom, right? Like, that's not a bad thing. But we felt like it would be more effective to have near peers deliver the message, and it seems like it really helped to shift from a video of a senior woman talking about her experience to women who are much closer in age to these adolescents, and also groups of women where they can even show by their very presence that there is this sort of experience of social togetherness and inclusion. So it seemed like that more explicit messaging in our redefined video that we, developed in the third wave made a big difference. But thanks for asking.
That's amazing. Yes, right at the front.
We had a very interesting conversation over the lunch table about, when, like, recognizing bias, and then you said, you've got to know when it's actually happening.
Yeah.
Any hints for how to know?
That's a great question.
I've
Yeah.
struggled with that for 30 years.
Yeah, I think the question is sort of how to know when bias is happening. Well, obviously, it doesn't come with a neon sign, right? Like, we know that women have an easier time doing this than men, at least in the domain of gender. So when we ask people about bias recognition, we know about data set after data set that the women are better able to differentiate between situations where, let's say a man treats a woman negatively, but it's objectively merited by the situation. Like a woman gets passed over for promotion, but she is chronically late and, not getting, damaging lab equipment and basically not the kind of person you should be promoting. Women are more comfortable saying, yeah, that doesn't sound like gender bias. Whereas some of the men are like, I don't know, maybe it is, probably not, And then similarly, if we create a scenario where, maybe a woman's complaining that one of her postdocs is pregnant and isn't going to be as available to work, but she doesn't have the same, kind of treatment of a male postdoc, women are pretty comfortable saying, a male postdoc who also has children, saying, that sounds like gender bias. Like, that really sounds like a double standard, whereas the men are also saying, that sounds more like gender bias than the first scenario, but they're still not as sure. So I think some of it is when you are in a group that is targeted by stereotypes, of necessity, almost as like a survival skill, you start having to think a little bit about, is this the kind of situation where I'm seeing my male colleagues or peers being treated differently than I am, noticing when that's happening and maybe trying to counteract that or point it out. But there isn't just like a little litmus test, right? Like, it's not something where I can just say like, oh, it's always gender bias if there's this, or if there isn't. Yeah, but I think looking for inconsistencies in how men and women are being differentially rewarded or penalized for the same behavior. He interrupts and he's confident, she interrupts and she's pushy, right? Like, those kinds of double standards aren't helpful and they don't actually create equity, they create the opposite. So, and recognizing where our ideals even may be biased toward working much better for one gender than another. Like our table was talking about maybe not having a lot of big events at 7 p.m. or things like that, trying to actually structure work in ways that is inclusive. I think there's a lot that just talking to and listening to other people and hearing their concerns helps you know what gender bias looks like right now in this day and age, in this context, and then figure out, okay, how can we help people to overcome that and not show those inequitable sort of behaviors. So sorry, no magic formula, but the idea of experience, listening, recognizing the ambiguity that women can show gender bias to each other. Like, this isn't something that only men do, right? That we're all potentially culpable, and that not every time that a woman experiences a negative outcome is it somehow automatically gender bias. Like, really being able to clearly reject that sort of position as well is, I think, helpful. Yeah.
That's great. Any other from here? Or I have a question from the online audience too. I'll throw it out. They're actually very curious to hear, Hilary, how you got into this work. Like, I don't know if that's when you get all of the time.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a great question. I got into this partly through a male ally. So I had a senior male colleague, one of the men who hired me, who said, Hilary, I think you'd be great at this. He knew that I had some passion about these topics, even because my husband is in software, and it was very salient to me that if I'd go to have dinner with him or what have you, that there were literally more women in like video game posters on the wall than there were at like desks and cubicles in some of the workspaces he'd been in, or that wandering around, it's like that the meeting rooms were named after different Star Wars planets, or there's just all these kinds of cues that are potentially not as welcoming to everybody, that it doesn't conform to a very sort of male nerd culture model that got popularized in the 70s. So the invitation from this colleague to say, be a part of what we're doing, we're creating this sort of like pan-Canada research consortium, and we think that you would be well positioned to contribute, was something where I said, I'd love to. And I had been doing mostly work on racial bias for most of my career. That's actually what got me really into social psychology, is wanting to tackle issues of racism. But I feel lots of connections and parallels that span these domains, and there are areas that should be talking to each other. So it's been really exciting to be able to kind of broaden out and to try to, build on some of my own lived experience in some ways. Yeah, thanks.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Yep.
I'm just curious, so I'm not sure if I understood this correctly, but at one point you talked about the fact that in your workshops you did something that was values-based for the women, but you didn't approach it with the little boys from a values perspective.
Yeah.
Can you just expand on that?
Sure. We certainly didn't do anything anti-values with the boys. I think the idea was there was more of an effort to elaborate on those kind of value-based connections with the girls, partly because there's a lot of research suggesting that for girls, whether through nature or nurture, hard to say, but girls tend to care a lot about other people and about making a difference in the world and having these sort of broader motivations, and that they're going to be excellent, passionate workers when you can kind of plug into those motivations. Whereas obviously some boys also have those same kinds of, these aren't things that have to be gendered. And again, it's kind of above my pay grade to figure out where those differences in values may come from. But given that we know that those value differences are there, one of the ways to make a more diverse STEM is to make sure that all the different purposes that STEM can serve are better illustrated. So we're building on other researchers' work there by trying to especially hit that theme hard for girls. But it was part of how we tried to do the value affirmation for boys too, was to let them see how a value they cared about is kind of reflected by their counselor or their camp counselor saying sports are really important to me too, or whatever the value or the passion that the boy had picked. Having that authenticated by someone is pretty key to breaking down defensiveness. And we did that in our workshops for men and women professionals too, to try to help men really feel connected and affirmed in that context and feel like this is not about finger pointing. This is really about teamwork, problem solving. That's what STEM professionals love, is solving tough problems, right? That's what we do. So bringing our analytic skills to bear on solving this particular thorny problem, let's do it together. That was the emphasis, and trying to prime that value of problem solving and being analytic partners was sort of laying the groundwork for learning about bias.
So do you think the engagement, if you were to approach it, would it be as important for both, or would it just
So great follow-up question there about whether it's necessary kind of to do that value piece. We do have some experimental work suggesting that without the value piece, boys are less receptive, or sorry, I should say men, because this is a university sample for that particular study. But if we just give them a message about girls' abilities being masked by stereotypes without first doing a value affirmation, they're not as receptive to that. It's threatening, right? If somebody says that, you have this GPA, but a girl with the same GPA might actually be more academically gifted than you, that she's been held back by stereotypes that didn't affect you. You could see how a lot of boys would find that rankling. Even some of our male camp counselors, we had to kind of talk through it a little bit to be okay, what's going on here, right? But if you first help them see how valued they are in this setting, and this is not about pushing anybody out, this is about just broadening the circle, that seems to make a difference to men's receptivity to those messages. So yeah, we think that's why having the psychological evidence of what works or what are the necessary preconditions to create openness to change makes a difference, rather than just setting people down and telling them do this, do that, and expecting things to get better.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, we can take one more audience question here, and then I have one online that we'll finish up with. Does anyone want to take the last in-person question? Yes?
When you're trying to get allies on board, how do you explain to them why this is important? Why does it matter?
Yes, I thank you. That's a great question. And I think built into your question about how to explain why it matters is what we think of as step one. So I think that being aware that bias is happening is step one. Caring enough to do something about it is step two, and then preparing so you know what to do is step three. So when I teach workshops, this RISE workshop that I just described about trying to equip people to be allies, a pretty significant component is trying to get on the same page about the fact that the problem is real, and helping even understand, sometimes through mathematical simulations, why some people might not see the problem, but it's still there. That personal lack of visibility into something doesn't mean it isn't happening. And once you have the awareness that, there's a problem, pretty much everyone wants things to be fair. Like everyone who's got a kid is like, you know your kids want things to be fair. Like my kids fight over even imaginary cookies being divided fairly, right? Like fairness is a pretty core value, and men and women both care about fairness. So once you can acknowledge the reality of bias, then recognizing that we need to counteract bias together to create more fair and equitable situations, like that's something that a lot of folks can buy into. So we do a lot of evidence-based work to try to build that case. And I mean, the other thing I would say is, at least for me, bringing data. Like a lot of people really, really find it convincing when they see something aggregated and sort of rigorously tested. So that's been the approach that our team has brought us, saying if we're trying to change the minds of highly analytic, quantitatively minded people to be more on board with this, let's take an analytic, quantitatively minded, scientist to scientist kind of approach. And it seems like that has been more effective than, say, the average diversity training that's out there in the world that tends to be best guesses rather than really best practices from an evidence standpoint. Thank you.
Great, great question. And I think this final question kind of feeds into everything that you've been talking about, but kind of just to wrap everything together, they're really interested in just knowing what are one or two key takeaways that they can apply directly right now to really try to influence and apply what you've shared today in their immediate areas, communities, schools, workplaces.
Great question. So what sort of practically speaking, what can we do? I think that the implications for working with kids, I think the content of what I talked about, like the messaging around values and helping girls to see the value in STEM and the broad value that it has, we can see that that makes a difference. Helping boys to recognize girls' abilities by, again, helping them to realize that even in today's day and age, stereotypes can still be out there. Like it's not somebody's fault per se. They're kind of in the air we breathe, but because of that like we all need to do something about it. I think we could start consciousness building at a young age. I'm the mother of 3 boys, and again, we talk about this kind of thing. I think modeling is a big part of it. One of the stories I like to tell, because my husband does all the cooking, is the kids were really worried when my dad was traveling that my mom wasn't going to have anything to eat. They thought that all men did all the cooking, right?
True.
And it's like, no, just explain that's just what works for us because I'm terrible at cooking. But at any rate, like the idea of modeling, living, like being in existence proof, giving visibility to people who are, broaden our picture of excellence so we understand more broadly what STEM excellence can look like is important. And then from the workplace side, I think recognizing the value of not just reacting to bias when we see it, but actually taking proactive steps to create a welcoming environment, reaching out, affirming people, giving authentic compliments, showing respect for people's work, that those are really important, positive small steps. So we talk about micro-inclusions instead of micro-aggressions as sort of a concept to be thinking about. And that looks different for each of us, but spending some time actually reflecting on like, what am I well positioned to do? The roles that I have as a mentor, as a leader in various contexts, and actually planning out and doing those things can have big impact. So.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for being so engaged in our conversation. With that, we'll thank you, Hilary.
Yeah, thank you.
And for our in-person audience, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break as dessert kind of comes around. So feel free to get a beverage, use the bathroom, that type of thing. And we'll resume shortly. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much again for joining us. It's great to be part of such an amazing community of Women Plus studying math and computer science. If you are interested in learning more about the Waterloo Women's Impact Network or engaging with us further for future events, which hopefully have fewer tech issues, of course, I invite you to visit our website, which is uwaterloo.ca/math/win, and that's win with 2 W's. And we will engage and connect with you there. Please don't feel like this needs to be the end of our conversation, though. As your virtual moderator today, I am going to be staying online here for the next little while, and I hope that we can continue to engage over our second discussion question. We'll be discussing coming up with our in-person audience a little bit more about what would it mean and what would a great community look like for Women Plus in math? What types of activities, events, and supports would be necessary? So with that, I invite you to continue to engage with us. As I said, I'll be online, so please don't be afraid of that. And I hope that we will see you soon. Happy International Women in Mathematics Day to each and every one of you. And again, sorry about the tech issues, and I look forward to engaging with you more. Take care and bye for now.